Going to be setting up a compost pile somewhere over here by the shed. I don't know if I'm going to do it on this side or on the other side, but I've got a little pile here that I've been saving, but I think I'm going to use most, if not all of this as a Hugelkultur fill for the latest planter bed that I built back here. And I know I've touched on Hugelkultur in the past, but probably haven't said a whole lot about it. But basically it's a nice way to fill the bottom half of your bed that not only takes up a lot of room, but it also provides nutrients to the plants that you plant here. And it does so for years, because it takes years, a decade or more even, for these logs to fully break down. So I'm going to cover this, and I'm going to cover the compost in today's video. So let's get to it. So Hugelkultur has been around for a long time. It was actually created in Germany, and it's been around for many years. They learned, way back when, to use the resources that they had on hand in order to fertilize their gardens. So the way that I like to utilize Hugelkultur is to put these larger logs and branches in the bottom, and then I like to come around and fill in the gaps, with smaller cutoffs from bushes, shrubs, even trees to some extent, and just kind of fill in the gaps. And then I'll top that off with some peat moss, and then I try to get about halfway up by the time I get to that point, and then fill the rest of it up with garden soil, compost, manure, a mix of those ingredients. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fill in the gaps with these smaller cutoffs. And I apologize for the wind. Looks like we've got another storm kicking up, and it's going to be coming in here, so we'll see how far I get before that hits. So you can see as I'm filling this in that I'm trying to lay most of this in between each of the larger logs, and I've gotten about maybe a third of what's over there, so I've still got plenty more to bring over here and fill up the rest of this. But the thought here is that the logs will be there for many years, and this smaller stuff will start breaking down really quickly and start adding nutrients to the garden relatively quick. So let me finish filling up these gaps, and we'll be right back. Okay, so I've got most of these gaps filled with the small brush cutoff, and I still have a little bit left, but I think I want to save that for the compost pile. So what I'm going to do now is go grab some peat moss, and we'll spread that on top of this. Okay, so I just picked this, it's a 100-pound bag of premium peat moss, so we'll go ahead and get that spread around a little bit. Okay, so the idea here is not to give it full coverage, just to spread a small layer around the entire bed, and just to provide more of that another layer that'll break down quickly. So from here, looks like it's just about halfway filled up. So we'll fill the rest of it up with a mix of garden soil, compost, and manure. Alright, that's all of the fill that I've got left. So I'm definitely going to need at least that much more, probably twice that, in order to finish this bed off. But that's okay. I can pick that up tomorrow. Okay, so one of the nice things about hugelkultur is it's one of those set it and forget it type of deals. So you set up the lower half of your raised bed, and you pretty much just forget about it for the next 8 to 10 years. So really, once you get that set up, you're only worried about the top half. That's where all of your amendments are going to go year after year. And then eventually, when all of the logs and everything that you have underneath break down, you're going to end up with really nice, rich, fertile soil. And that could take a while. I saw on a channel a guy was going to rebuild his beds. He'd had his beds for about 4 years, and they were starting to deteriorate. So he thought it was a good time to just completely dismantle his beds and take a look at how the hugelkultur was doing. He just dug it out, and the logs that he had in the bottom had decayed about 40%, still had about 60% of the log on there after 4 years. So you look at that, you figure that it's going to accelerate over time, so not necessarily going to take 10 years for those to completely break down, but a good estimate would be 8 to 10 years. So and what did break down had turned into really rich, fertile soil. So hugelkultur, he convinced himself that he was doing the right thing. So set it and forget it, and then the top, you want to be adding amendments every year, and part of those amendments are compost. So today what I have to do is I have to go out and buy my compost from a local farm here called Miller Farms. But the idea is to get to the point where you don't have to do that. You're actually producing all your own compost right here on site. So that's what we're going to be setting up over here. So let's go to that. Okay, so I picked up a product called GeoBin off of Amazon, and it's just a nice, easy way to set up your first compost pile. This is actually made out of 100% recycled plastic, so it's helping to keep plastic out of the landfills, which is a good thing. And composting, itself is a way to keep unwanted vegetation out of landfills, because it's not in a compost environment, so it doesn't actually turn into compost. It turns into methane, which is bad for the environment. So composting at home to create nitrous soil is actually good for the environment. So I thought I'd give this a try, and it looks like it comes with 5 locks. It's adjustable in size. It's 3 feet high, and the length it looks like 11.5 feet. So it has these lock slots all the way through it, so you can adjust the size just based on where you want to place these locks. So I'm going to go ahead and set this up over on the right side of my shed there, close to the trees, not under the trees, because I do want to have some kind of amount of sun. You don't want too much sun, but you do need some sun. And the trick is to make sure that this has sun, moisture, and air. And then for your ingredients, you want both carbon and nitrogen. And I'll touch on what that means in just a minute. Okay, there it is all set up. It's pretty easy. Just unroll it. And it comes with 5 of these fasteners. And where the piece that's on the inside, I threw 2 of the locks on that one, and then I put 3, one on the top and bottom, and then one on the middle on the outside, the piece that wraps around the outside. And that seems to hold it in place pretty well. And again, this is adjustable. I'm just going to start off with this smaller size. Okay, there's really no secret formula to creating good compost. It's pretty basic. You have two main layers, one being carbon and the other being nitrogen. And the difference is carbon would be vegetation that has completely dried out. So like those pine needles that you see mixed in there, that would be considered carbon. And dead leaves, dead branches, pine cones, even shredded paper and cardboard, and like tissue rolls, toilet paper rolls, that type of thing. You want to make sure that your cardboard doesn't have any print on it, but cardboard from like tissue rolls, those are fine because there's no print. But all of those things are considered carbon. And another good source of carbon would be ash from like a fireplace or a fire pit out in your backyard or something like that. And nitrogen would be things that still have a lot of moisture in them, like these cutoffs that we have from our bushes here. Those are some evergreen cutoffs, and those were cut just a few days ago, so there's still plenty of nitrogen in those. And then other sources of nitrogen would be like table scraps. You want to, or at least you're told, never to put meat or dairy or manure from animals that eat meat. And they never tell you why that is. They just kind of leave you to assume that it ruins your compost. And the truth is, it doesn't. You can actually put those things in your compost, and your compost will be just fine. Probably even be better. The reason why you're asked not to put meat and dairy into your compost is because it attracts rats. If you are okay with attracting rats, then go right ahead. But for me, this compost pile is in my yard, close to my house, so I'm going to avoid the rats, and I'm going to not put meat and dairy into my compost bin. But this pile right here is a pile of carbon and nitrogen mixed, and that's a perfect thing that you want as your bottom layer of your compost, because it's going to allow a lot of airflow. So I'm going to start with that, and then from that point on, I'll layer. Every time I put some scrap from inside the house, I'll try to make sure I've got some carbon. I'll come out here and I'll get some pine needles, or I'll go to my fire pit and get a cup of ash. A cup of ash would be plenty. Just spread over the top. You just want to make sure that whenever you put down nitrogen, a layer of nitrogen, put down a layer of carbon as well. And with every layer that you put down, make sure that you give it plenty of water. You don't want it to be a sponge that you dip into a bucket and pull out. You want it to look like that sponge after you've wrung most of the water out of it. You want it moist, but not sopping wet. That's the best formula. And then what you want to do is make sure that you turn your compost about every 4 to 6 weeks, just to aerate it. And if you do those things, you're going to have success with your compost bin. So let me get to getting mine set up. Okay, so I'm going to apply some water to this first layer. And I've just got a watering can here. And remember, this first layer is a mix of carbon and nitrogen, and it's probably about a 50-50 mix, which is fine for this first layer. They say that optimally you should have a 2-to-1 ratio. For every 1 part of nitrogen, you should have 2 parts carbon. I'm not sure that that matters as much as keeping it moist and aerated. I believe those are the 2 main components to having a successful compost. So let me go ahead and add some table scraps. I've got a couple of small buckets that I've been holding on to, waiting to get this set up. So I'll spread that around, and then I'll go get a cup of ash for the top layer. And this does have kind of a not an earthy smell to it, but a fermenting smell to it. So it's good to place this at the back of your yard, and maybe in a location that's away from the neighbors if you're on a small 3rd-acre lot like I am. It's not bad though, and if you keep a good ratio of carbon to nitrogen, that'll keep any odors to a minimum, and it'll just smell like good healthy compost. Okay, I've got a cup of ash from my fire pit, and I'm just going to sprinkle that. And just 1 cup full is probably more than enough for an application. And I'm going to go ahead and give it a little bit more water. Just to get that carbon mixed in a little bit. And that ought to be good. Okay. That's really all there is to setting up a compost bin, and there's no reason not to get started. You can use this pretty much anywhere. You can use it in your lawn, flower beds, flower pots, raised garden beds. You can pretty much use it anywhere. It's a lot better alternative than dumping this stuff into a landfill where it's going to turn into methane. Okay, we interrupt this program to give a quick update on this last bed. In between thunderstorms, I was able to finish filling this up with a nice mix of garden soil and compost, and get some pumpkins planted. We've got some baby boos. And we've got some Jack B. Littles. And some pies. And we've got some Howdens in the back. Not sure if those are going to make it or not. I went ahead and put them in there. I did see, I think these were out of the ground too long, but we'll see. Maybe we can nurse them back to health. So hopefully we'll be able to get those Howdens going, and then we'll have a nice complement of all 4 of the pumpkins that we bought. So there you go. That's it for this week. So want to thank everybody for watching, and we'll talk to you later.